Yes, Matt.
Sounds
Over to
great.
you. Sure.
And then where would you like to take the conversation from there? You want to really dig in and use this more as a introduction to OKRs conversation. I think one of the most important questions I'll have for all of you is, where are you on the OKR life cycle? Is it at the beginning thinking about this as a way to help run our business? Is it we've implemented OKRs and we're trying to figure out how to make them scale, or how to make them adapt to the crazy crisis that we all find ourselves in? Where's everybody at?
So let me start with that, Matt. Actually, I think if you remember, you had gotten me started with KOAN, and Wizikey adopted KOAN, I think, about a year back, right? And I think there are some businesses here who have been trying to adapt to to OKR, right? And especially in the last, I think, 1 month, ever since India has gone into lockdown, most of us have been trying to figure out how do we scale OKR, especially when all of our employees are working remotely, right? And I think the reason of doing this very close knit with about, I think, 8 to 10 people was so that they can ask you pointed questions and more focused questions once you have set the theme of how various companies, including you, are using using OKR to work remotely. Okay. So I want to make it more of an interaction between and more intimate discussion once you have set up the tone. Does it work?
Sounds great.
Sure.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks for getting all this organized and for having me here. I know it's quite reasonably late there in India. It's quite reasonably here in Palo Alto, California. But it's never too early to talk about goals. So I'm the founder and CEO of KOAN. Before starting KOAN, which was just about 4 years ago, I was a co-founder of a company called Jive Software. And Jive may not be a company that you guys have heard of, but we were an early pioneer in collaboration software, and in particular, so started that way back in 2001. In fact, first got to Jive mostly started in New York, and we got to New York quite soon after starting Jive, September 1st, 2001. And we were going to go look for office space in New York City on September 11th. And my co-founder lived on the Upper East Side. I lived on the Upper West Side. So he came down on subway stopped, he got out, saw the second tower fall. And that ended up at crazy, extraordinary times, of course, especially being in New York. And it ended up being a reasonably challenging but good time to found a company. And I think one of the things giving me comfort is totally the wrong word. One of the things giving me conviction about this moment in time in the world, and not only what it means as an impact on all of our personal lives and with our families, but just in terms of impact on our businesses, is that great companies find a way to make it through crises like this. And in fact, it can be a way of really finding what those best companies are, or giving mediocre companies a chance to figure out how to really focus and thrive and become great. That's certainly what I hope all of you will end up doing with your businesses. And I think that is one of the opportunities of using OKRs as a framework if you do it the right way. Like any business process, it can be used as a weapon for good or for evil. I hope part of what we're going to talk about during the chat today is how to use OKRs for good. But I'm getting ahead of myself, kind of back to the history really quickly. So Jive found ourselves in New York in those early days right after 9/11. So we bootstrapped the company, grew it slowly at first, and then a little bit more rapidly over time. And we really were building collaboration software for two use cases. One was large online communities for companies' customers. And then later, we started building out the use case of kind of a social intranet, I guess you could say, like collaboration for large companies internally. And then once Facebook and MySpace and Twitter happened, that was an amazing wave to ride. So we did a first funding round as Jive really started scaling with Sequoia Capital back in 2007. Did our Series B with Sequoia, did our Series C with Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins, did an IPO in 2011. So it was up and to the right for a long time, growing really quickly, trying to take advantage of what was happening out there from a just category growth perspective. And one of the things I found really frustrating about that up and to the right growth era was it felt like we were reinventing the wheel around good management practices again and again. And we'd hire executives or board members would join the company, and they'd tell me after they told me each thing, I thought about it a little while. I was like, well, that's really obvious. Like, why didn't somebody tell me that before? And these are things like, Matt, you should probably be having one-on-one meetings with all the people that report to you. Or let's actually write down why we exist as a company or what we want to do over the next several years. Or let's add metrics to how we're measuring the business and have those available to everyone in the company. So we have a more objective way of knowing whether we're making progress or not. Or maybe we should write down our goals and be explicit about what those goals actually are. And so we gradually started doing those behaviors, in some cases, better than others. That took us through IPO. We kept growing strongly for a couple of years. And then unfortunately, things got harder for Jive. And there were a few things that were acting as headwinds. So Microsoft bought one of our main competitors, a company called Yammer, and became a much stronger competitor to us directly. Eventually Slack came out, which was not directly competitive with Jive, but it did blow up the collaboration market a little bit. We were trying to finish a massive re-architecture. So we had an on-prem legacy, and we were trying to become a true multi-tenant cloud SaaS provider. And so that was some really heavy lifting from an architecture perspective. And we were facing slower growth as a small public company. It was like the worst of all strategic challenges at the same time. And that phase of the company was super hard. There's a great book called the Hard Things About Hard Things. I think I'm getting that right. If you guys haven't read it, it's Ben Horowitz's first book. And I don't make that many book recommendations. We end up reading a lot of business books at KOAN. Only a small number do I really love or do we really love. Measure What Matters, OKRs book by John Doerr, also pretty good. Anyway, it was quite a struggle in that time. And one of my very visceral learnings was that we'd never really built muscle strength around some of these key leadership practices or disciplines. So we're doing some of it well, but we're doing what most companies do around goals, for example. So once per quarter, we'd gather together as the executive team. We'd argue for a day, trying to come up with a strategy, come up with what we thought was a good set of things to do. We'd write them down as goals, usually into a spreadsheet or PowerPoint. And then the next week, we'd put those goals up in front of the whole company. And then we would never talk about them again until the next quarter. And you can probably imagine what happened, which was all the tactical firefighting took over. We had big and ambitious plans for what we wanted to do strategically. We made some progress, but we never made as much progress as we wanted to. And it became challenging to get everybody aligned and really focused on what was most important. Instead, everybody was trying to fix the problems that they had in their part of the business, standard challenges. And it was really out of that struggle experience that I got fired up about the idea of working on KOAN. So went and had this very vague idea with a co-founder that we would go tackle some problems around leadership and trying to build software that would help companies do leadership better. Got connected very early on with a gentleman named Maynard Webb. So Maynard, also a name you guys might not recognize. He was the COO at eBay way back in the day, and has been the CEO of several companies. He runs a venture capital firm called Web Investment Network. He's on the board of Visa and Salesforce. He was the chair of the board at Yahoo. Most importantly, though, he is incredibly passionate about the topic of great management and leadership. He's written several books, does fireside chats with CEOs, and has almost this cult-like following around Silicon Valley, with Maynard being just perceived as like, this is just a masterful operator. He's had this idea of software eats bad management, kind of riffing on the Mark Andreessen quote for a number of years. And so the lucky coincidence was a mutual friend connected us very early. Maynard became our first investor in KOAN, a mentor for the company, and ended up having essentially the supercharged version of ideation and research early on into KOAN's history. So we spent 6 months just going around interviewing leaders around Silicon Valley and around the world, and basically looking for patterns of, all right, how can you, like, what are good leadership behaviors? And then what are the opportunities for taking those great leadership behaviors and turning them into software? And, really, the punchline there is you have to look for small behaviors that, if repeated again and again, lead to big results. This is a pattern, by the way, that applies to our personal lives. You can use the sports analogy. If you talk to Olympic athletes, what they'll often tell you is, I don't really ever think about the day of the Olympics. Like, yep, I'm going to have my performance. That's going to be important. That's going to be crazy. But what I really focus on is the practice that I do every single day. And I know that if I have the discipline and I put in the effort and I put in the work, good things are going to happen, because these small behaviors add up into something big. So anyway, we chatted with that became a little bit of a theme of what we knew we wanted to build. We ended up chatting with really interesting people, folks like Kevin Scott, who runs engineering at LinkedIn and is now the CTO at Microsoft. Scott McNeely, who was one of the co-founders of Sun Microsystems and was the CEO there for a very long time. Colin Powell, who ran Joint Chief of Staff, 2 million people in the US, kind of a famous leader here. So all sorts of interesting folks looking for those patterns, and eventually settled on what we thought we could build for KOAN and how we'd go tackle this problem. With the main theme being, we wanted to build out a set of functionality to represent some of the foundational elements of good leadership. Goals is definitely one of those really big pieces. And with the OKRs being just a really popular framework for doing it. We're not particularly religious about OKRs at KOAN. What we think is goals and doing goals in a great way as a team and as a company, that's a foundational leadership behavior. OKRs is probably the best of the different goals frameworks out there, as defined in a couple of important ways to me. One is it's become kind of ubiquitous. So there's a ton of great knowledge sharing and best practices about OKRs as a framework out there. So, rather than there are a bunch of other goals frameworks out there. They're probably equally as good as OKRs, but they're not nearly as popular. So that makes them not as interesting to me. And then second reason is OKRs is quite simple. And it has a lot of the most important ideas kind of baked in at a foundational level. And in particular, two really radical ideas. We'll start digging into this as part of the conversation, but two really radical ideas. One being goals should be transparent to the entire company, and you need to have that be a core focus, is that transparency leading to alignment. And then the second being that not going to be prescriptive about how you achieve the measure, whether you have um, achieve the objective, create and unlock. They're going to achieve the goals. The opposite of a minus in leadership. This is a way of empowering people, showing trust, which I think is especially important in this era where we're all having to do our work just like this over Zoom meetings. You can't meet and look people in the eyes. And so, this is a time where you have to find a way of empowering your people and giving them trust. And OKRs is a really good framework for doing that. So we, at this point, KOAN is a software startup. We have as part of our platform goals and OKRs, plus some other functionality to help teams and companies run well. I did not, I have no intention of making this session a pitch about KOAN. I think this is meant to be more of a conversation about OKRs and best practices and things that you guys might try for running your teams. If any of you want to try KOAN, that'd be awesome. I'll be very glad to help. Whether you can provide a friends and family discount if you eventually decide to buy it. But in any case, excited to have this chat, and sorry for that really long intro. I sure can. Okay, awesome. Those are great questions and hard challenges. Yeah, and I do want to delve into that kind of topic of you didn't ask this question, but I think it's a little bit of a related one, which is, oh my God, when everything changes in an instant, do I even still do OKRs? What do I do with all the OKRs that I had? Do I keep them? Do I throw them away? So maybe address, use your question around transparency to talk a little bit about OKRs in a time of crisis and what you do. I don't know that there's anything in OKRs canon that has an answer to your transparency question. So I'm just going to give personal opinion on that one, and maybe the rest of this group. One of the great things about doing in this small forum is we can be a little bit more collaborative. So if anybody else has advice they want to weigh in on and perspective on that, that would be most welcome. But one of our core values as a company is transparency. I think there is there's this interesting question of there's transparency and then there's just freaking your team out. And there's probably somewhere in the middle that we all need to be as leaders. And the way we approach at KOAN is very upfront, quickly what this challenge was going to mean for our business. And the way we've been articulating that is, look, we were operating in an environment where we were looking to have about a year of runway before we would go and raise our Series A. So the entire goal was grow as fast as we possibly can, so that we're taking advantage of the market opportunity around OKRs and the popularity of them and what's happening from a category perspective. But it's a race, so we need to go really fast, and we're going to invest pretty heavily, and we're going to get to our Series A within a year or less. And so that's what we're planning for from a runway perspective. Everybody at the company always knows our cash balance, and we're always pretty transparent with those sorts of numbers. And so what I initially communicated was, look, we have a problem because we were operating in a model where we were looking to have a year of runway, and now we need at least 18 months of runway. And ideally, we would probably have 24 months of runway, because it's going to be a long time before investors start seriously writing checks again. And it's not that no checks are going to get written. It's not that VCs have shut down, but it's pretty prudent to plan to not need to do a fundraise immediately, especially depending on where your business is in the life cycle. So that's kind of step one, is communicate the problem and be really transparent around that. And then what I felt a pretty heavy responsibility around was to take action, make a set of decisions and take action as quickly as possible. So I didn't lay all those things on. You're probably about to see my 4-year-old, by the way. Hi, Abe. Do you want to say hi real quick?
I heard you all the way downstairs.
Yeah, we're talking about OKRs. Sorry, I didn't have the door shut. All right, go have breakfast. I love you. I know you're all working from home too. Nice. So it was communicate the problem as early and as quickly as possible, and then make a set of decisions and take action as quickly as I could. And that was, it wasn't being transparent about every single thing we were thinking about. And so, we cut a lot of discretionary marketing spend. We ended contractor relationships. We've actually instituted there's various loans you can apply for in the US. And basically, it was like, I knew exactly what my gap was in terms of this is what we need in order to have 18 months of runway, communicated that to the company, and then have actually made them a part of the process and for that. And a lot of you, unfortunately, like a ton of businesses here, are probably facing the need to do some layoffs to have a smaller team in order to get to the right answer. This is a totally separate conversation from OKRs. Unfortunately, had to live through that at Jive, going through the 2008 financial crisis. And the standard advice that you hear all the time is, unfortunately, still the best advice that I know of, which is take action as quickly as you possibly can, and then cut deeper than you think that you need to, so that you only need to do it once. And if you only do it once, you probably will not crush the culture of your company. If you do layoff after layoff after layoff, you're keeping people in uncertainty forever. Nobody ever feels that their jobs are safe, and that will destroy the culture of your company. So I hope none of you are having to face that really hard decision as a leader. I've had to before, and it sucks. But if you do it as quickly as you can and go deep to make sure that you don't have to do it again. So anyway, that gets us, I don't know if that is answering some of your transparency question or not. Okay. And then I wanted to briefly, I would love if there's other advice around the transparency issue, that'd be awesome. You guys can see that what I'm sharing as well, right? Cool. So maybe just a brief aside on OKRs in a time of crisis, and then we'll talk about how to do this whole thing remotely. So as you might imagine, probably won't be surprised to hear that we do not advise people to just throw away OKRs. In fact, this is probably a moment in time where having clarity on what's most important is more important for your teams than ever. So this is a time to start doing OKRs if you've never done it before. So 5 steps, I think that's probably too many. But what we've been telling our customers, so look, even with COVID-19 and all of us working from home, not everything is different about our business, but it can be a time where people are panicking. And so just simply reaffirming the things that are still true and still important. Hey, this is still our mission. This is still our multi-year strategy. Yes, this is going to be a fundamental impact to our business, but let's start by reaffirming what still matters. After you do that, though, close out and get rid of everything else you possibly can. So if you had 5 different goals that you were working on, try to get it down to 1 or 2. And anything that's not critically important, say, look, we're just going to park that for now. We'll come back to it. I know that feels really important. We wanted to make progress on it, but guess what? We're in a global economic meltdown and pandemic. So we're gonna park it, and we're gonna focus on what's most important in the short term. And then obviously create some goals, new goals that directly address the crisis, whether that's cost savings or finding new customers, whatever it is. And then very strongly recommend that this is a time where having less goals is really important. If I had a nickel for every time I have to give out the advice of you have too many goals, that is the most common problem that we see is too many goals and too many OKRs. But especially in a time of crisis, you need for it to be as simple as possible. And then finally, you need to keep things very agile. So our businesses are going to keep changing pretty rapidly. You might consider, instead of having a quarterly OKR process, 6-week-long OKRs. And you might explicitly say, like, look, every single month, we're going to revisit these, and we're going to throw away the things that no longer seem important, and we'll create new goals if we have to. We're just going to stay agile. Because the very worst thing is if you have a list of goals that nobody believes are still the most important things. And in terms of, and we can come back to that if that's interesting to anyone, but I do want to briefly answer the other question around how you do this whole process remotely. So the advice there is, there's 2 challenges. So one challenge is, how do you plan out your OKRs with your leadership team? If you've been doing it as an in-person process where you could have an offsite and use sticky notes and a whiteboard and kind of brainstorm the strategy that way, it just does not work as well through a Zoom meeting. And so the the very simple, but what we've actually found to be really helpful advice is move everything to being asynchronous as much as possible. So rather than trying to replicate what you were doing in person through a Zoom meeting, instead write it down, ask for feedback loops that are asynchronous. So if you're the CEO, write down a set of draft objectives and send it to your all your directs ahead of time and ask for feedback about how to improve those objectives before you all get into a room together in a Zoom and try to hash it out. And I think especially in a Zoom meeting, there's also the challenge of the loudest voice takes over the whole conversation. So inside of a room, you can read one another's body language. And just like I'm talking way too much in this Zoom meeting, I apparently have the loudest voice. That's an extra challenge and another good reason to make things asynchronous. And then final piece of advice around it is the behaviors and especially the weekly cadence of reviewing your goals is more important than ever. So one of the core parts of KOAN as a product is this idea of doing what we call a weekly reflection. And part of the reason we do that is we believe that you need to talk about your goals every single week. And the conversation should be, what do we do this week in order to move our goals forward? And so maintaining that discipline and actually getting even stronger around the idea of we're going to do a weekly goals review virtually with everybody remote. That's probably our number one advice about how to make this work when everybody's working from home.
Anshul, can I? Hey, hi, Matt. Matt, I'm going to ask a little bit of a fundamental question. One, we were trying to kind of work with OKRs for a little over a year now. We were trying to see if there are multiple ways to evaluate OKRs or there's just one unified way. And second, more like a sub question here is, do we only look at the progress or are we also looking to kind of cut a few points when something doesn't go right, like some kind of penalizing system as well?
And if it's okay, I'm going to ask you a couple questions about the questions you just asked to make sure I understand them. So for evaluating OKRs, do you mean, what's the process that we would recommend at the end of a OKR life cycle? Like, how do I score these things? What's the right approach there? Sure. Okay, cool. And then on the penalizing, is it, can you just explain a little bit more and maybe some of the struggles that you're having around what we.
So hypothetically, let's say one of the goal was to have some kind of NPS to reach, let's say, around 70, and every lesser percentage from there on, let's say we were able to reach 50 or something was delayed by 4 days. So can we put like a 0.2 minus per day kind of penalizing system there, or should we not think of penalizing at all?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Those are. I think those two questions are really related. So that's great. So we definitely recommend having a OKR life cycle. So usually the advice that we give is have a yearly set of objectives or a yearly strategy, and then quarterly OKRs. And quarterly ends up being, in normal times, a nice mix of, hey, that's enough time to really tackle something strategic and big, but it's not such a long period of time where the goal is so immense that it's really hard to measure progress on a weekly basis. In these crazy times, if you're doing yearly objectives and strategy, you might need to pull that into being quarterly strategy. And you might need to pull your goals into being quarterly to either monthly or once every 6 weeks. Everybody's business is different, but aligning everybody along those timeframes and having goals that are kind of consistently on that timeline so that everybody can be planning is a great idea. And then there's this best practice of after we get to the end of a cycle, whether it's monthly or quarterly, what do you do? So we think having a retrospective is a really great idea. And that retrospective is an opportunity to do scoring of all of your goals, along with essentially like, all right, what are our learnings? So why did we fail? Why do we decide to work on something different and never make any progress? And then, of course, equally as important, let's use this opportunity to really celebrate the wins and call out teams and individuals that really knocked it out of the park, and kind of get the company addicted to success and doing it again and again and again. So this idea of scoring is a pretty important idea. In KOAN product, as long as you have some way of scoring that is universal across your whole company and everybody clearly understands what it means and how you're doing it, I think that's good. We do it in a way that is pretty similar to OKR canon. So one of the way that John Doerr essentially recommends doing it in Measure What Matters, which is we use a score between 0 and 1, and we say that 0.7 is achieving the goal. And generally speaking, achieving a goal should mean that you hit the metric to some degree, and hitting the metric becomes an interesting question, because was this a stretch goal or was this a commit goal? And anyone that tells you that all of your goals should be stretch goals, I don't think is probably ever actually run a business. Stretch goals are great, but practically speaking, you need some commit goals mixed in there. Sometimes the way that we write down goals internally is that we explicitly say, like, this is our commit and this is our stretch. But in any case, a score of 0.7 would mean either hitting 70% of your stretch goal or hitting 100% of your commit goal. In other words, 0.7 is success, and then anything above 0.7 is exceeding more than success, and anything under 0.7 is not getting all the way there. I think it's totally okay to be very explicit in when you're planning a goal, saying, this is what it takes to get to 0.7, this is what it would take to get to 0.8, and here are things that would cause us to score it lower. And so we have a goal that we're working on right now where we're delivering some big new functionality and some important changes. And so we're just going to be explicit about it and say, like, look, if we can deliver that early, that counts as more than 0.7. That's going to be a 0.8 or a 0.9 or even a 1. Did that? I know there's a chat question too. And Nitin, feel free to jump in with your question about this. But did that answer your question about scoring and penalizing progress, or is there something deeper that we should explore?
Oh, I'm just trying to think over it. Do you want me to read the question which came in chat?
Abhishek, you want to unmute and ask yourself?
Okay, yeah, I see this, but yeah, Abhishek, please, I can answer it, or please feel free to unmute and to ask it yourself.
Okay, I think, Matt, you may just want to answer the question.
I'll go ahead and go, yeah. So the
Please.
question was, in continuation with this question, John Doerr advises not to link OKRs to remuneration and bonuses. What are your thoughts? Amen. Please don't do that. And there's a bunch of reasons, and I'm gonna even take that a little bit further and explicitly recommend that you do not do individual OKRs. And that might seem like a really crazy idea, but we generally recommend against doing individual OKRs, and I'm going to tell you why. And especially in a time of crisis, this is a really good moment in time to simplify how you're doing goals and say, look, we're just going to do company, departmental, and team goals, and we're not going to do individual goals right now. And so the reason, let's start with remuneration and bonuses. So as soon as you tell someone that goals are linked to their bonus or their salary, what's the first thing that they're going to do with their goals? They're going to lower them. They're going to say, no, let's not drive our NPS to 50. How about 25? That seems a lot more reasonable. If you're telling me that I'm going to get paid by hitting this goal, then let's go ahead and lower our goals. The other thing around performance management and goals is so there's this idea of stretch goals, and how we're driving progress there. The other thing that's really challenging about that is almost all efforts inside of modern companies that are doing any sort of knowledge work, it's all team-based activities. And so it becomes really complicated trying to figure out, like, how much did this individual drive of this team goal? Was that really an individual goal, or did a bunch of people work on it? How do you portion this out? All of that gets really complicated and just makes the process more heavyweight. It's one of the reasons that we don't recommend doing individual goals, is that practically speaking, most teamwork is team-based, and it can actually work against the idea of doing alignment. So when you're doing team goals, that becomes a really easy context to have conversations every week around the progress that we're making or not making as a team. And having almost real time the ability to refocus and reprioritize. So if you had 4 goals in 1 week, it's like, oh my God, we're not getting it all done. It becomes really easy as a team to say, look, here are the 3 most important ones. Let's just forget about that 4th goal. If you've done it all as individual goals, like the negotiation about what am I going to drop for me personally so that I can go help you accomplish what you need to, because we're in a time of crisis, that becomes way more complicated. And that becomes even more complicated if you've been telling people that you're going to get paid based on hitting your individual goals. So this idea of transparency and alignment, it's way harder when you're doing individual goals. It's much easier when you're doing team goals. And yeah, all those conversations around letting you reprioritize, letting you stay agile, bringing up your goals in a team meeting, all of those things are harder when it's individual goals. And it can work against this principle of using OKRs as a way of actually unlocking autonomy in your team versus micromanaging. If you're trying to use goals and OKRs as a way of micromanaging your team, it is going to backfire tremendously.
Yeah.
It'd probably be better not to do OKRs than to use them that way. And the temptation with individual OKRs is that it gets very prescriptive very quickly. It's like, here's the plan for what everybody's supposed to be working on, rather than here's the outcomes which define success. Now I unleash all of you to go figure out how to achieve them. And a bunch of other things came in text chat, and I was too busy talking. So let's read
I think,
that.
Matt, there's a question by Dimple. Sometimes key results end up as to-dos. How can we avoid that?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. So this is probably the number 2 problem that I see after having too many key results, is that they simply become to-dos. So you guys, it sounds like a lot of you are using OKRs as a framework already. Just to really briefly go back to the fundamentals. So OKR stands for objectives and key results. Objective is always this qualitative outcome that you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to accomplish. They should be qualitative and inspiring. They should be time bound, so we can actually do this thing in the time that we've allotted. So an objective of have the happiest customers in the world that you've set to be quarterly, that'd be a really bad objective. It's inspiring and qualitative, but there's no way that you're going to have the happiest customers in the world in 3 months if they're really miserable right now. So you can be a little bit hyperbolic, but they should still be like, we can actually make some impact on this in the period of time. And then this really big challenge of your key results. So key result is how you'll measure whether you achieve the objective. and it's not what are we going to do to achieve the objective. So, if your objective is to have improve the way that we're working with customers, and one of your key results is improving NPS, there's going to be a bunch of tasks and a bunch of initiatives that you come up with for how you actually achieve that. The key result should be, it's not the list of tasks, it's not the specific set of projects, it's a way of measuring whether we've actually achieved the objective. And this is super, super hard to do, because the first instinct from your team is going to be, all right, awesome, you told me the objective, now I'm going to write down all of my ideas about how to do it. And what you need to tell them is, that's awesome, that's great, but before we have our list of ideas and projects, let's agree on how we're going to measure whether we achieve that progress. Having a list of KRs that are written the right way is not an excuse to not have a plan. But what you tell them is, go write down your plan, have your list of tasks. That's not what we're going to talk about we can talk about your tasks every week and whether we're making progress. But what we're really going to measure ourselves by is these KRs that are not just a list of tasks. So, and the only way to actually do this is to just educate your team and to practice it again and again and again, and to give feedback, because it's really hard to build that disciplined behavior.
Rohit, do you want to ask a question?
Sorry, it was to me?
Yeah, you mentioned if there are no financial rewards. You want to ask that?
Yeah. So my, Matt, thanks a lot for the, for the whole discussion. I mean, I've had a lot of experience over decades with goals and so on. And, both in large companies and in small companies. Now, look at it like this. The traditional system that we have is that there's an annual review, right? And there may be a half-yearly review or there may be a quarterly review, but at the end of the day, there's an annual performance reward to be paid, which is money, right? And so if OKRs are not aligned to any financial reward, then what teeth do they have? I mean, so yeah, we can say, okay, this is the OKR, it's measurable, it's quantifiable, it's aligned with the strategy of the company, and there's strategic alignment, the whole team should go for it. But then where do the teeth come in? Where does the financial part come in?
Awesome question. So I'm not recommending that you do not have performance management process and that you don't have a yearly review process and give people feedback. You need to do that to run your business. And in particular, you need to decide, who do I give a bonus to? Who needs to be fired because they're not performing? Who do I enter into a performance feedback loop around? All those things still need to happen in your business. And goals are going to be part of that conversation. Because guess what? If that's the strategic things that people are working on, obviously their performance is tied to goals. What I do give as advice though is don't explicitly link the two together. So as part of a nuanced performance conversation that a leader is having with their direct, what they did on goals, the leadership that they showed or didn't show, that should be part of a performance review and part of the conversation. But that's very different than saying you're going to be directly compensated, you're going to be fired or promoted based on achieving your goals. So it's a direct link versus an indirect link. And that probably just feels very wishy-washy. And I'm gonna take that even further. So there is one book that I very enthusiastically recommend. Let me share my screen again really briefly. Is a book called Drive. And anytime I share my screen, I lose the ability to see all of your faces. So I'm not sure if anyone out there has read this book. And it was written by Daniel Pink. It's been out there for a little while. And I really like to think about it in the context of OKRs and goals. Because essentially the point of this book is our old ideas about how to motivate humans that actually worked kind of in a factory setting. So the carrot and stick approach. So I'm gonna reward you with money, or I'm going to punish you by taking away money, or punish you in some way. None of that works very well at all, and can in fact completely backfire for knowledge workers. And then in fact, we do our best work when we are intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated. And so the whole point of this book is essentially, all right, if that's true, and he has a lot of good science around this, then what does it look like to provide intrinsic motivation for people? And the general idea is that you provide intrinsic motivation when people feel autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So I have the ability to define my own work and what success looks like. I'm not being told what to do, but I'm told the outcome, and then I can be creative about how I do it. Mastery means I get to work on the things that I'm good at and continually get better at them. And then purpose is this idea of like, I'm connected to other people in a higher calling. And that makes me feel very motivated. We created this thing that we call the hierarchy of working with purpose, kind of riffing off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the idea being that you can only unlock the next level if you've satisfied the level, the base level. With generally, we can share out all these slides. This is kind of a primer on OKRs, some of the core principles and how to make them work well. But the general idea is that if you're using OKRs in the best possible way, you're unlocking intrinsic motivators for people. And that will ultimately be much more effective than simply giving them a raise or firing them. You're still gonna have to do some of those things, and money is important, but there's a massive amount of really good research and science that tells us that paying people more money very rarely makes them more productive. And in fact, it's all about figuring out ways of unlocking their intrinsic motivation. I feel empowered to do this. I feel excited about our mission. You've been around enough to know all these things, so I'm not telling you anything new, Rohit, but that I usually try to think about OKRs as ways of empowering intrinsic motivators versus linking them to the extrinsic motivators, which we know don't actually work that well. But we still need to have some form of, because we need to ultimately decide, who do we give a promotion? Who do we give a raise? Who do we fire? So you still need to do that process. I'm just saying, use OKRs more for intrinsic motivators than extrinsic.
I think Rohit,
you guys have really awesome questions.
Rohit, you are muted, I think. I can unmute you 1 second.
Yeah, so I was just saying that I completely, I'm completely personally aligned with the whole thought of, intrinsic motivators. I think time and again, I've seen that, it's about unlocking that. I think that it's more easy to do that, frankly, when you're a real, like a real baby startup, right? And I'm actually starting a new venture now with a bunch of people. And the team size is about 10, 12 people. So it's like a small family, right? And everybody is aligned because we are supercharged because that's all we have. And the office also feels, of course, we don't go to office now, but it just felt like really very small and cute and all of that. When it becomes successful, and then when you start crossing that like 100-person kind of size, or more than 70 people, I think then the whole way that you would do intrinsic motivators becomes, I think, very different, because now you're not that family. You might not even know after 75 the name of the next guy who's come in, and how he got hired and so on. You don't really need to know every detail, but so it also is very interesting, right? It also depends on the size of the company and the stage the company is in. But the small companies, I think the smaller company, it's like that's the real intrinsic motivator company. That's the ideal intrinsic motivator company, right? It's you're there for the passion of it as well, and the real passion is there at that stage.
No, I agreed. I think you're completely right. This problem gets harder and harder the larger you get, and it's To me, it's why. So you're always kind of fighting for the best possible version of what your company can be at any particular size, and what you feel as a really small team and how you can operate as a family. That just is not the same at 1,000 people. It never can be. So I think partly it's like, look, that's why at a larger company, alignment is even more important and more challenging. Is if you can help people feel more connected to the purpose of what you're trying to do as an organization. You might not have a family feel that is can be so good at intrinsic motivation, but you can still get people rallied around this mission that we're on. And then it's also why we spend a lot of time thinking in KOAN about what does it actually look like, the behaviors inside of a team? Because there's a lot of data showing us that at large companies, for example, the relationship that you have with your team and the relationship that you have with your boss is by far the most important indicator for whether you feel engagement at work. And the mission is important, that does help, but do I get along with my boss? Do I get along with my team? That becomes fundamental because you have a kind of the mini version of that family. And that's another really good reason why doing team-based goals can be a really strong motivator and a good way of unlocking intrinsic reward. But I completely agree with you. The challenge becomes even harder. I think it becomes, it's a reason why it's even more important to have transparency and alignment and to be intentional about how you're doing these behaviors, because you can kind of get away with a lot as a small team. It can be chaotic, but you feel such strong personal bonds to people, you'll get yourself through it. If you're working in person and you're around the water cooler or drinking beers together or whatever, like, again, you can get through it. When you don't have those things, when you're a larger company, when you're trying to do it all remotely, you need to be very careful and explicit about the practices that you put in place in order to try to get something closer to that feeling of connectedness.
So I think there's a very interesting question by my friend Ask. His name is Abhin. He actually is part of a very, very big company, very, very large company, right? And I think he is managing the entire digital wing there. He's here. Abhin, why don't you ask quickly?
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. So my question is, I manage a 70 people digital team in a company which is 10,000 employees. Now, I am trying to implement OKR in my company after having implemented OKR in multiple different startups. But when I'm trying to do it, the rest of the 10,000 people in the company are working on KPIs, which are an annual or at max a quarterly looked number. So how to work in that scenario when team has to work together, and especially at the time of Corona, this COVID-19, when everybody wants to do the digital transformation.
Yeah.
And there are OKRs, which are my tech, digital and product OKRs, which are 70 people who reports on to me. But the rest, 10,000 employees are on a different path altogether and still works on KPIs.
And I just wanted to add to that
Awesome
question. It's sometimes not about the raw numbers, but it's just sometimes the people that you have even in a very, very small startup, which is the case in my company, is that people are just not used to having used OKRs in the past. So they've all been KPI driven, right? And it's a smallish setup, but it's just you're trying to move everyone over to OKRs, and then COVID hits, and obviously people are going to derive comfort in ways and means of working that they're used to. So yeah, I think it's more of a change transformation question, I believe, and scale adds complexity, but it's so that's what I wanted to add as well.
So we actually, just to add on, we actually use a tool which was built in India for similar like a KOAN for OKRs. Anshul, who was that friend of yours who's Dockable? So we use Dockable. We use a year-long Dockable, but we all, this 70 people team went into Dockable and started using it. It was made mandatory by even HR, the human resource team, for the whole company to move to Dockable, but people did not.
Yeah. We're struggling with that. It's a stillborn. Yeah.
So, and it was very tough for them to see these things. And then they went back to their Excel sheets where they wrote 5 things, 20% each. And this happened to us, and my last whole year went into trying with Dockable and serious efforts by the HR teams to actually get all the 4,700 people we wanted to get into this platform. No, it completely bombed, honestly.
Yeah. We could have a whole much longer conversation. I realize we're getting to the end of our time together. So maybe we can have a brief chat about this, but you've honed in on one of the most important topics, which is ultimately like the most important, the most challenging thing is that this is change management, and it's humans, and changing humans' behaviors is very hard. And a tool will never magically fix that. Like using KOAN would not magically fix that, by the way. Like there's still all the challenge of, yeah, ultimately it needs to be back to this idea that talked about at the beginning, like small behavioral changes that you do every day or every week that add up to a big result. And that's the most challenging part of this. And there's all sorts of good approaches to doing change management, and train up some folks that become champions and highlight parts of the organization that are doing it well, being really crisp about having a playbook where you've written down behaviors you're expecting out of people, and thinking about it as behaviors, not just data recording. So make goals a part of your weekly staff meeting. One-on-ones are a good example of a behavioral change. There's like these small disciplines
sorry, Matt,
that impact.
just to add, the moment we realized, and you answered it, but the moment we realized we got into one-on-ones, the individual OKRs came up. And the moment individual OKRs came up, it was death for the team OKRs. Because the guy who is the smartest in the lot, who can actually push the team together, fulfilled his or her OKRs, which was an individual OKR to get the highest growth in the company.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was a much more articulate reason for why we don't like individual OKRs than the reason I feel for it.
I do one-on-ones.
Totally. You asked a question about OKRs and KPIs, and fundamentally, I don't think that they should go together relatively well. Like usually, what we think about, the difference, and everyone has a slightly different approach, but when we describe OKRs and KPIs, we usually describe it as KPIs should be the way that you're measuring the health of the business, and should be a set of metrics across your business that you're always measuring, and that you're using as a way of ensuring that you're continuing to operate at an excellent level. So if you have a KPI around 99.99% uptime, you're always measuring that, and you're always trying to drive that, and that takes continued sustained effort. Your OKRs should be the smallest possible set of things that you're trying to do to fundamentally change your business in a strategic way. So we think that most teams and companies will have KPIs and OKRs. OKRs is a set of things you're trying to change. KPIs is a set of things that you're measuring the ongoing health of the business with. And by the way, like if that 99.99% uptime goes to 99% uptime, guess what your OKR is going to be? It's going to be to fix your uptime. In terms of having them, both, ideally is like you could probably fit your KPIs and OKRs together in a pretty easy way. Like they both have some fundamental things, like let's use metrics to measure progress. The difference within an OKR is that you're actually writing down like, why are we trying to achieve this? Which is so much more helpful to your team in them figuring out like, oh, I know what we're trying to do and why. And now that helps me decide and to have some autonomy to figure out, well, what's the plan for doing it? Like if the only thing you're telling someone is change this metric, then they might go and come up with a completely wrong way to fix that metric because they don't understand why you're tracking that metric in the first place. Like if you're trying to drive an NPS score of 50, well, one really good way of making sure that you have an NPS score of 50 is to simply delete any customer that gives you a low NPS score. that would be a perfectly rational way for someone to know that they could move the metric. That'd be really dumb. Obviously, nobody should try to do that. But you need the objective in there.
One of the things that I have tried, and it's like you all said, right? I mean, change is not easy, but one of the things we've tried to make things relatable, and it's not 100% success yet. And I particularly like doing this is that we try to map business change, environment, working style change to somewhat things that are somewhat relatable. For example, in this particular example, right, it could be, let's say you and your friend are going out on a road trip. A KPI could be trying to reach your destination within a set time and within a set budget. An OKR could be something that helps you chart your route. There could be 4 or 5 different routes, and you want to be aligned on the approach, literally, that you're trying to take. And this question about individual versus team and how you want to, because you also don't want those superstars to feel demotivated that they don't have an individual OKR where they can outperform on. So, and really the answer to that is hiring. So, if you have a situation where the driver and the navigator are, and you clearly know that the driver is having to do a bulk of the work and the navigator is not doing enough, that's a different conversation, right? But I think the challenge is, however relatable we make these examples and try to distinguish between cultural measures of alignment, strategic, and those kinds of measures of alignment in KPIs, adoption and taking that abstract concept and mapping it to one's work is always tough, and B, scaling it. You can do this in a team of 10, but team of 1,500 starts to become difficult. I mean, just
Very
sharing
different.
some experiences, but yeah.
Yeah, no, if we do anything like this again, making it more of a conversation where all of you guys can share with one another your experiences and some of the practical things you've seen work well, that might be an interesting way to run it. You guys all have some great insights and practical experience.
I think, Matt, we have overshot the time, and it's very early for you right now. I just want to tell you that, Matt, I told you that OKR is getting extremely well adopted in the startup ecosystem as well as in businesses. So I think there's a light in front of us. Maybe in the next couple of years, OKR will become as ubiquitous as Salesforce CRM tools that we have seen around us, right? And I think, Matt, we would love if one of your team members probably could take one more session with us, maybe in 1 month time or something, right? And if there are some more questions, there were some more startups who wanted to join the session today, but we couldn't plan it because it was planned in the last 72 hours, right? And I really appreciate the time that you have taken out to help us. I will also like to, everybody else who was present today, and if your questions were not answered, maybe you can just shoot the questions to me and I'll probably send them to Matt if Matt could answer them later also. Yeah.
Of course.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Sure.
Really appreciate your
Matt.
time and awesome questions and insights that all of you had. Enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to having another conversation. That'd be very fun.
Thank you, Matt. And please stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Anshul.